Hey guys, tonight we're heading into the sunlit yet shadowed world of the ancient Greek gods, the sort of place where even a mild case of boredom could lead to someone's doom. You're standing in a fragrant meadow, olive trees swaying lazily in the breeze, and the world is shimmering under the light of the sun god himself, Apollo. He's radiant, yes, but he's also restless, which is never good news for anyone. You probably won't survive this. Not because of monsters or curses, but because one god's ego mixed with boredom has the energy of a toddler armed with finger paint and zero supervision. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with your location and local time. It's always fun to see where and when we're all collectively drifting off to ancient disasters together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Apollo is known as the god of music, poetry, prophecy, and all things beautiful. But even gods have dull days. Picture him reclining on a marble bench, sunlight dancing off his golden hair, fiddling with his lyre. He plucks a few notes, but none inspire him. Maybe it's because mortals have been singing too many repetitive harvest songs lately. Or maybe he's just in a mood, the kind where even flawless music feels like noise. This boredom is dangerous. When a god is restless, their gaze starts to wander, and their sense of fairness, it can slip away like sand through a mortal's fingers. Some historians like to say Apollo's mythic misadventures were metaphors for natural cycles, light triumphing over darkness, order over chaos. Others argue that's giving him too much credit, because most stories involve his pride getting bruised and someone else paying the price. In this case, he starts listening to rumors. Word reaches him that a satyr named Marsyas has been playing a flute so beautiful dial that I law. Fully it makes even nymphs weep. Marsyas, they say, could charm the leaves from trees with his melodies. And though no one has dared to claim he's better than Apollo, the mere comparison gnaws at the god. A mainstream fact about Apollo: he's known for being competitive, especially with music. He once competed with Pan, the rustic god of the pipes, and barely restrained himself from doing something extreme when Pan's friends claimed the rustic music was more appealing than his lyre. So you can imagine how quickly the idea of some half-goat, half-man satyr outshining him starts to itch like a rash. Here's the quirky tidbit. The flute Marsyas played wasn't ordinary. It had been crafted by Athena, goddess of wisdom, and discarded because playing it puffed out her cheeks unflatteringly. She threw it away, and Marsyas stumbled upon it. A god's cast-off, but to Marsyas it was a treasure. The satyr's skill grew overnight, and soon his music floated through the mountains, enchanting even the air spirits. Scholars still argue whether Marsyas ever meant to challenge Apollo directly, or whether he was just a really enthusiastic musician who couldn't keep his flute to himself. Maybe he was arrogant. Maybe he was just good. Either way, Apollo's boredom had finally found its target, and like the slow tightening of a bowstring, the stage for the coming contest was being set. You imagine Apollo standing, setting aside his lyre with deliberate grace. Around him, the air seems to shimmer, the way it does before a summer storm. He steps down from his gleaming throne in Olympus, each footstep echoing like a warning. The gods nearby sense something brewing. Hermes arches an eyebrow. Artemis pretends not to notice. Siblings know when not to get involved. It's a rare and dangerous thing, after all, to be the focus of Apollo's undivided attention. Marsyas, meanwhile, has no idea. He's probably in some shady grove, playing his flute for an audience of dryads, blissfully unaware that each nose places on clue is drawing Apollo closer. And you, unlucky traveler in this myth, can't help but think, Maybe it's not the music that's dangerous. Maybe it's what happens when the wrong person hears it. The meadow around you is quiet now. Even the birds seem to have fallen silent, sensing the tension that's gathering. You can feel it in the pit of your stomach, the way mortals always do, when a god is about to make someone else's life very complicated.
Section 2.
Marsyas is the kind of satyr who makes you forget the warnings carved into temple walls about pride and gods with fragile egos. You can picture him now, perched on a sun-warmed rock in a forest clearing, his goat legs folded beneath him, flute pressed to his lips. The music he coaxes from it is soft and liquid, flowing like the stream nearby, rippling through the trees. Nymphs gather, leaning against oak trunks, their eyes half-lidded, as though the notes themselves are casting a spell. Birds, normally skittish, hop closer to listen. Even the river spirits peek their translucent heads from the water's edge, sighing like children at bedtime. Marsyas didn't start as a legend. He was just another satyr, mischievous, wild-haired, perpetually dusty from chasing wine and laughter through the hills. But then he found Athena's flute. Or, depending on which version of the story you prefer, the flute found him. Athena, irritated by how the instrument puffed out her cheeks, had tossed it into the wilderness, declaring it unworthy of a goddess. Marsyas, stumbling through the woods, picked it up and played a few tentative notes. The sound was haunting, as if the reeds themselves remembered the breath of a deity. Marsyas knew at once that this was no ordinary flute. He practiced obsessively. Days turned to nights, nights to mornings, and he played through it all. His hands grew calloused, his lips chapped, but his skill sharpened with every melody. Soon, the hills were alive with whispers. "Have you heard Marsyas? He plays like no more Tal, no god." Travelers paused on roads to listen, telling stories of how the satyr's music soothed their fears and made them weep for reasons they couldn't explain. Mainstream fact. Greek mythology is packed with tales where music isn't just entertainment. It's power. Orpheus, the legendary bard, charmed even the stones and trees, and his songs softened the hearts of the gods of the underworld. Music was a force capable of moving mountains, sometimes literally. Marsyas, unknowingly, was stepping into that dangerous territory. But here's the quirky detail. Marsyas wasn't alone in his obsession. Satyrs, unlike gods, didn't live in polite isolation. They thrived on company, on raucous dances and communal feasts. His friends teased him for practicing so much. "Play for us, Marsyas," they'd shout. "Put down the flute and join the revels." He'd grin, flash his teeth, and keep playing. They thought it was just dedication. They didn't realize he was chasing perfection, as if each flawless note would unlock some hidden divine secret. Scholars still argue whether Marsyas ever claimed he could play better than Apollo. Some versions say he was tricked into boasting, others that his music simply spoke for itself. Either way, the rumor reached Olympus like a spark carried on the wind. Apollo heard whispers of a satyr whose melodies rivaled his own. For a god of music, there was no insult sharper than that. You can almost see Marsyas on this particular afternoon, finishing a song as the last notes fade into the hush of the forest. He wipes the flute on his tunic and stretches, unaware that his name has already passed Apollo's lips. There's a strange stillness in the air, the kind that makes animals freeze mid-step. If Marsyas notices, he doesn't care. He lifts the flute again, begins another tune, and the trees lean closer to hear. If you were there, you might want to warn him. But mortals and satyrs rarely recognize the moment their lives begin to tilt. The nymphs around him sig. Happily the river gurgles softly, and the satyr plays on, as oblivious to the storm brewing on Olympus as a child chasing fireflies. And maybe, for a moment, you feel a pang of sympathy. After all, Marsyas's only crime was making music too beautiful to ignore. Section 3. Somewhere high on Olympus, Apollo is pacing. You can imagine the scene, sunlight spilling like molten gold through the temple columns, a god's footsteps echoing on marble, the quiet crackle of an ego catching fire. News of Marsyas's music has reached him fully now, no longer whispered, but discussed openly, and that makes it worse. A satyr, half goat, half man, wholly mortal. To think he could even be compared to the god of music himself? It's the sort of insult that burrows under Apollo's flawless skin and makes his smile a little too sharp. Apollo pauses, plucking a few notes on his lyre. The melody is exquisite, of course, but it feels hollow. Every strum seems to whisper the same thought. They're talking about Marsyas. Arceus. Gods are not accustomed to rivals. Zeus may occasionally worry about titans, Athena about hubris-filled heroes. But Apollo? He expects reverence. And here's this woodland creature stealing the admiration that should, by all cosmic logic, belong to him. Mainstream historical fact. In Greek culture, music wasn't just a pastime. It was sacred. Musicians were often seen as favored by the gods, and contests of skill could draw entire cities to watch. But those contests always carried risk. The losers could face humiliation or worse. After all, mortals challenging gods rarely ended well. Ask Arachne, who thought she could weave better than Athena and ended up as a spider for her trouble. The quirky detail here is that Apollo wasn't the first to feel prickled by Marsyas's melodies. Some versions of the myth suggest that Athena herself was annoyed to hear her discarded instrument in use again, especially by someone so skilled. Scholars still argue whether she warned Apollo, nudging him to act, or if she simply observed from the shadows, lips curved in a knowing smile. In either case, Apollo now had a reason, however thin, to step down from Olympus and address this insult. You picture him calling for his chariot, the one pulled by blazing steeds that streak fire across the sky. Servants scatter to clear his path as he strides forward, every inch of him radiating the kind of beauty that makes mortals stumble and forget their own names. It's not that Apollo needs an excuse to descend among humans. He enjoys their awe. But this visit has a purpose. His golden bow hangs at his back like a threat, though he's not here to shoot arrows. Not yet. Meanwhile, in some leafy grove far from the heavens, Marsyas is oblivious. Maybe he's teaching a few curious nymphs how to hold the flute, laughing as their cheeks puff out like chipmunks. Maybe he's fine-tuning a new melody, chasing that elusive, perfect note. Either way, he doesn't see the shadow falling across the clearing. Until it's too late. The music falters. The forest goes silent. Even the breeze seems to stop, as though the world itself has realized it's about to witness a collision. Apollo steps into the clearing with a kind of presence that makes the air shimmer. His eyes, bright, sharp, unblinking, find Marsyas immediately. He doesn't need an introduction. Gods always know who they've come for. Marsyas stands clutching the flute like a shield, and for the first time in a long time, he feels very small. "Your music," Apollo says, voice soft but carrying like thunder, "has reached Olympus." It's not a compliment. You can tell by the way Marsyas swallows hard, his goat legs trembling slightly. He manages a polite nod, perhaps even a bow, though satyrs aren't known for formal manners. And here's where scholars start to diverge. Some believe Marsyas, emboldened by his success, boasted that his flute could rival Apollo's lyre. Others suggest he said nothing at all, that it was Apollo who twisted the silence into an insult. Whatever the truth, the god's pride has been pricked, and that's all that matters. You can feel the tension knotting in the space between them, the way a storm thickens the air before it breaks. The nymphs have melted into the trees, unwilling to be collateral damage. Even the river spirits slip beneath the surface, their luminous forms disappearing. Marsyas stands alone now, the flute in his hands, suddenly heavy. Apollo takes a step closer, the faintest curve of a smile on his lips. It's not the kind of smile you want to see from a god. And just like that, you know this story is about to escalate. Because when a god's pride is on the line, there's no such thing as restraint. Section 4. Apollo doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. The quiet words that leave his mouth are sharp enough to slice the tension in the clearing. "You and I," he says, "should see which of us is truly favored by the muses." Marsyas blinks, heart hammering against his ribcage. A musical chip contest? Against a god? You might be wondering why he doesn't immediately throw his flute on the ground, run screaming, and live a long, anonymous life in the hills. That would be the sensible choice, sure. But mortals and satyrs aren't wired for self-preservation when pride, or the promise of glory, is involved. The satyr hesitates, and Apollo tilts his head, golden hair gleaming in the sunlight filtering through the trees. Or, the god adds, you can decline, but that would be disappointing. Mainstream historical fact. The Greeks often held musical contests at religious festivals, and victory was considered a sign of divine favor. The winner might receive a crown of laurel leaves, but more importantly, they'd bask in the glory of the gods themselves. Losing wasn't always deadly, unless, of course, your opponent was a deity with a fragile ego. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some tellings of the Marsyas myth say that Apollo didn't give the satyr a choice. He simply declared the contest and set a date, summoning gods, nymphs, and mortals to watch. Scholars still argue whether Marsyas agreed willingly or if Apollo's suggestion was so laced with divine intimidation that it might as well have been a command. Either way, Marsyas doesn't refuse. Maybe he believes his flute, blessed by Athena's craftsmanship, will be enough. Maybe he's simply too stunned to protest. Word spreads like wildfire. By the time the contest is set, the entire countryside is buzzing. Mortals arrive from nearby villages, whispering about the satyr bold enough to challenge Apollo. Nymphs slip through the forest, clutching flowers, while river spirits rise from their streams to watch. Even the other gods are curious. You can picture them now, perched on marble benches, conjured from thin air, their glowing forms casting light on the makeshift stage. Hermes is already making bets with Dionysus, who is cheerfully sloshing wine from his cup. Marsyas stands at the center, flute in hand, and you can see the way that his fingers tremble slightly as he tests the reed. Across from him, Apollo adjusts the strings of his lyre with serene confidence. His expression is maddeningly calm, as though the outcome is already written in stone. He doesn't seem angry anymore, and that's even worse. The audience hushes. A soft breeze rustles the leaves, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the faint hum of tension. Apollo nods, a silent invitation. You may begin. Marsyas takes a deep breath, the flute cool against his lips. When he plays, the world holds its breath. The notes spill out in a stream of sound, smooth and aching with emotion. His music winds around the trees, weaving images of forests and freedom, of sunlight dappling through leaves and the joy of running barefoot through tall grass. Even Apollo's face flickers, just for a moment, as though he feels something stir. Scholars debate who judged the contest, and whether the muses themselves tilted the scales in Apollo's favor from the beginning. Some believe the other gods formed the jury, unwilling to risk offending either participant by ruling unfairly. Others think the contest was less about judgment and more about spectacle, because the gods, like humans, enjoy a good drama. When Marsyas lowers the flute, his chest heaving, the crowd erupts in soft murmurs. He's played beautifully, maybe too beautifully. Apollo steps forward, plucks a single note on his lyre, and the sound is so pure, it silences everyone instantly. He begins to play, his fingers dancing over the strings like they were born for this. And of course they were. The melody he conjures is brighter, sharper, almost unbearably perfect. It makes you think of sunrises, of cities rising from nothing, of empires destined to last forever. And yet, as the last note fades, Marsyas doesn't wilt. He meets Apollo's gaze, chin lifted. He may be a satyr, but he's not about to surrender. Apollo smiles. It's a small smile, but it promises the contest has only just begun.
Section 5.
The crowd holds its breath as the first round ends. Apollo's melody still seems to hang in the air, golden and flawless, like sunlight that refuses to fade. But Marsyas doesn't retreat. He's standing tall, or as tall as a satyr can manage with goat legs and a constantly twitching tail. His heart is pounding, but the set of his jaw is firm. He will not be intimidated by a god, even if that god's lyre could probably charm the stones themselves. Apollo raises an eyebrow, his fingers idly brushing the strings of his lyre as though warming up for another round. He nods, the gesture almost gracious. Again, he says, and Marsyas lifts his flute without hesitation. Mainstream historical fact. In ancient Greek contests, performers often competed in multiple rounds, each showcasing a different skill or style. Judges weighed technical mastery, emotional resonance, and even physical presentation. Music wasn't just about sound, it was about the way the musician held themselves, how their art connected to the audience. Marsyas closes his eyes and plays. This time, his music is bolder, more complex. He adds flourishes, trills, the kind of techniques that show off the flute's unique voice. The melody darts and soars like a bird in flight, playful and wild. Nymphs in the audience sway, their hands clasped to their hearts. And even Dionysus lets out a loud cheer, spilling more wine down his beard. But Apollo doesn't flinch. He waits until the last note fades, then raises his lyre. His music, in this round, is softer, almost intimate. It drapes over the crowd like silk, each note perfectly placed, perfectly balanced. You can imagine the audience leaning forward, entranced by the delicate beauty of it. Apollo's control is absolute. He doesn't miss a single string. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some versions of the myth say that Apollo's lyre could literally change the environment. Flowers would bloom when he played, streams would clear, and even the air would smell sweeter. And still argue whether these flourishes were later embellishments, or if they were meant to show just how impossible it was for any mortal or satyr to compete. Marsyas doesn't back down. He adjusts his stance, tail flicking with determination, and launches into another piece. This one is faster, more technical, each note tumbling over the next in a dazzling display. He's sweating now, but his fingers don't falter. The crowd is cheering, stamping their feet, and you almost start to believe he could pull this off. Apollo's turn comes, and he matches the satyr's tempo effortlessly. But then he adds something unexpected. He begins to sing. His voice is clear and piercing, threading through the music like light through glass. Marsyas, clutching his flute, can only stare. The flute cannot sing. The flute cannot add harmonies. He knows this, but he keeps playing, hoping the beauty of his melody will be enough. Scholars still debate whether this moment was fair. Was Apollo bending the rules by singing? Did anyone dare to object? Perhaps the judges looked away, unwilling to risk his wrath. Perhaps the muses, who supposedly presided over the contest, simply nodded in approval. After all, Apollo was their favorite. When the round ends, the air is electric. The audience applauds both musicians, but there's a subtle shift you can feel. Apollo's dominance is becoming clear, and Marsyas knows it. He wipes sweat from his brow, gripping the flute so tightly his knuckles pale. But there's no quitting now. He has to believe he can still win, because to admit otherwise is to admit he's already lost. Apollo regards him coolly, tilting his head like a cat toying with a bird. "You play well," he says softly, "but you have much to learn." And Marsyas, heart pounding, prepares for the next round, knowing the god will not make it easy. Section 6. The sun seems to blaze hotter as the next round begins, casting shimmering halos on Apollo's golden hair. Marsyas shifts his weight from one F to the other, flute poised, trying not to think about the beads of sweat collecting along his brow. The crowd is leaning forward now, sensing the tension tightening like a bowstring. You can almost feel Marsyas's nerves thrumming through the air, matching the quick rhythm of his heartbeat. Apollo, ever the picture of grace, simply strums his lyre once and waits. He doesn't need to warm up. His confidence radiates, heavy as sunlight. Marsyas lifts his flute, takes a breath, and starts to play. This time his music is fierce, like a storm sweeping across the mountains. The melody races and crashes, full of crescendos that make the nymphs clasp their hands and gasp. He pours every ounce of emotion into the song. Pride, desperation, hope. He knows he's outmatched, but if he can just move the audience, maybe he still stands a chance. Mainstream historical fact. In Greek myths, contests often weren't about skill alone, they were tests of character. Mortals believed that the way someone carried herself eyed themselves in defeat or victory revealed their worth. Marsyas's performance reflects that. Even now he's giving everything he has. A reminder that bravery doesn't always mean winning. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some tellings say Marsyas, in a moment of wild inspiration, began to improvise a rustic dance while he played, stomping his hooves in time with the flute. The crowd loved it, laughing and clapping along. Historians still argue whether this helped his case or simply made Apollo sneer harder, dismissing the satyr's charm as undisciplined. Apollo watches, expression unreadable. When the last haunting note fades, he lifts his lyre with deliberate slowness. The first pluck of the string sends a hush over the audience. This time, his music is dazzlingly complex. Notes cascading over each other like a waterfall. And then, mid-song, Apollo does something none of them expect. He flips his lyre upside down and keeps playing flawlessly. The audience gasps. Marsyas stares, wide-eyed. Taldit. Trick is not just impressive, it's humiliating. The lyre can be played in any orientation. A flute cannot. Apollo smiles faintly, his fingers dancing across the strings as if to say, "Match this if you can." You can almost feel Marsyas's heart sink. He tries, because what else can he do? He flips the flute, awkwardly pressing his lips to the wrong end, and all that comes out is a soft, pitiful hiss. The audience murmurs, pity creeping in at the edges. Marsyas rights the flute and tries again, but the magic is gone. Apollo has shown the crowd, and Marsyas, that this contest was never going to be fair. Scholars still debate whether the challenge was part of the original rules or if Apollo made it up on the spot. Some say the muses nodded solemnly, bound by divine law to accept the trick as valid. Others suspect the jury simply looked away, unwilling to challenge a god who could scorch the earth with a glare. Apollo ends his song with a triumphant flourish, the final note ringing through the grove like a declaration. The crowd erupts in applause, gods and mortals alike bowing their heads. Marsyas lowers his flute slowly, shoulders slumping, and you can almost hear the thought running through his mind. What happens to me now? Apollo's smile is serene, but his eyes hold a glint that makes the nymphs shiver. The contest is over. The god has won. And Marsyas is about to learn the real price of challenging the divine. Section 7. The air in the grove feels heavier now, as though the trees themselves are holding their breath. Marsyas stands frozen, flute still clutched in his hands, though it might as well be a stick for all the good it did him. Apollo doesn't speak immediately. He lets the silence linger, stretching it like a taut string. The crowd, made up of gods, nymphs, and mortals alike, shifts uneasily. Everyone knows that contests with gods rarely end with a simple handshake. Apollo finally steps forward, the lyre dangling loosely at his side. His golden hair catches the light, and for a moment he looks every bit the radiant deity mortals pray to. "You played well," he says, voice soft and melodic, as if offering a compliment. But there's an edge to it, a glint in his eyes that says Marsyas should not mistake kindness for mercy. Mainstream historical fact. Greek myths are littered with mortals and demigods who crossed a deity's pride and paid dearly for it. Niobe, who boasted she was a better mother than Leto, Apollo and Artemis's mother, was punished so severely that her story became a cautionary tale for generations. The gods, while capable of generosity, were equally capable of vengeance. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some versions of the myth claim that Apollo offered Marsyas a chance to explain himself. Did the satyr ever truly claim he was better than the god? Or was it a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by rumor? Scholars still argue over this. Some say Marsyas was silent, knowing nothing he could say would matter. Others believe he tried to plead his case, insisting he only ever sought to bring joy through music. But Apollo's mind is made up. He cannot allow the insult to stand, not just for himself, but as a lesson to anyone else who might dare to think a mortal could match a god. He raises his voice now, clear and unflinching, declaring that Marsyas must face the consequences of challenging the divine. Marsyas's eyes dart to the audience, seeking help. The nymphs who once swayed dreamily to his music now look away, their expressions pained. The river spirits slip beneath the water, unwilling to intervene. Even Dionysus, who had cheered so loudly before, suddenly finds the bottom of his wine cup fascinating. No one will stand up to Apollo. You can feel the fear radiating off the satyr, the way his fingers tremble around the flute. He knows the stories. He knows what happens to those who offend the gods. Still, he tries to speak. "Please," he says, voice barely audible. "I only wanted to play." Apollo's expressions. He doesn't soften. "And you did," he replies. "But you forgot your place." The god signals and attendants step forward, their faces blank. Marsyas stumbles back, his hooves scraping the ground, but there's nowhere to run. The crowd is silent now, the only sound the rustle of leaves in the breeze, as though nature itself is mourning what's about to happen. Scholars still debate the exact details of what followed, but all versions agree on one thing. Apollo's punishment was severe. This wasn't just about winning a contest. It was about ensuring no one would ever dare to challenge him again. Marsyas, clutching the flute that once brought him so much joy, is led away. And you, standing in the shadow of the grove, can't help but wonder how music, something so beautiful, could lead to such a cruel end. The grove empties slowly, the crowd dispersing in hushed tones. No one wants to be the one caught lingering when Apollo carries out his judgment. You can picture the nymphs slipping away like ghosts, their colorful dresses brushing the forest floor, their gazes fixed firmly on the ground. Even the other gods seem reluctant to stay, muttering excuses about pressing business elsewhere. No one dares question Apollo, but no one wants to watch either. Marsyas is left standing in a clearing ringed by towering trees, bound by golden cords that glimmer with divine power. He's still clutching the flute, though now it feels like a curse instead of a gift. His hooves scuff the earth, his wide eyes darting to the forest as if there might be an escape. There isn't. Apollo is standing before him, his lyre tucked casually against his hip, as radiant and untouchable as ever. Mainstream historical fact. Punishments from the gods were often designed not just to correct, but to humiliate, to remind mortals of their place in the cosmos. Think of Prometheus chained to a rock, his liver devoured daily for daring to give fire to humanity. These were not gentle corrections. They were nominal lessons carved into myth. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some versions of the story say Apollo gave Marsyas one last chance. He could choose the punishment himself. Of course, that choice was no choice at all. What penalty could possibly satisfy a god's wounded pride? Scholars still argue whether this detail was added later, an attempt by storytellers to soften Apollo's cruelty, or to highlight Marsyas's bravery. Apollo steps closer, his golden cords shimmering in the dappled sunlight. "You sought to elevate yourself above the divine," he says, voice low but resonant. "Now the world will remember the price of such pride." Marsyas's mouth opens, but no words come. There's a desperation in his eyes, a silent plea that goes unanswered. You can almost feel the cold weight of inevitability pressing down on him, the way a mortal might feel before a storm when the sky turns the wrong shade of green. The punishment is carried out swiftly, methodically. Some say Apollo flayed Marsyas alive when he called his eating away his skin as a symbol of stripping away his arrogance. Others soften the tale, claiming he was simply hung from a tree until his spirit left his body. The ancient storytellers didn't shy away from cruelty, but they also didn't always agree on the details. Scholars still debate which version is the true one, though all agree the message is the same. Challenging the gods has consequences. The forest is silent by the time it's over. Even the birds have fled. Apollo stands in the clearing, the sunlight haloing him like a reminder that he is, and always will be, beyond the reach of mortals. He turns, casting one last glance at the lifeless satyr, and then he's gone, back to Olympus, to his music, to his immortality. You can almost hear the trees whispering as they sway in the wind, their leaves rustling with grief. The flute lies abandoned in the grass, its once glorious melodies silenced forever. And somewhere deep inside, you feel the ache of it, the unfairness, the tragedy. Mars.
He wasn't perfect, but he loved music, and that love was his undoing. And yet myths like these endure for a reason. They remind mortals that beauty, talent, even brilliance cannot shield you from the whims of the divine.
Section 9. Word of Marsyas's fate spreads quickly, carried on the wind like a warning. The satyrs who once laughed and danced with him now whisper his name in sorrow. Nymphs weep in the groves, their tears watering the roots of the trees. Mortals speak of him in hushed voices, cautioning their children not to boast or draw too much attention from the gods. The myth begins to settle into the fabric of the world, a thread woven tightly into the tapestry of Greek lore. Apollo returns to Olympus, his expression serene, his lyre gleaming in the sunlight. There is no sign of regret, at least none that the other gods can see. He accepts their polite nods and half-hearted congratulations, his victory undisputed. But you can't help but wonder if even Apollo, in the quiet of his temple, hears echoes of Marsyas's flute in the wind and feels the faintest twinge of guilt. Mainstream historical fact. In Greek mythology, the deaths or punishments of mortals often had lasting consequences for the Natu world. When Niobe's children were slain, her grief was said to have turned her into a weeping stone. When Hyacinthus died, Apollo's tears became flowers. Marsyas's story is no different. Ancient poets claimed that a river sprang from the ground where his blood fell, its waters forever singing mournful tunes. Travelers in Phrygia were told to tread lightly near its banks, lest they disturb the music of Marsyas's spirit. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some versions of the myth say that Athena, who originally created the flute, retrieved it after Marsyas's death and locked it away, fearing it had caused too much trouble. Others believe the instrument simply vanished, carried off by the wind, as if it had never existed at all. Scholars still argue over whether the flute itself was the source of Marsyas's talent, or if he was simply destined to be exceptional. The story of Marsyas takes on a life of its own. Bards and storytellers embellish the details, turning the satyr into a cautionary figure. They linger on the image of him bound in the forest, his fate sealed by his own ambition. But not all tellings are harsh. Some paint him as a tragic hero, a symbol of defiance in the face of impossible odds. They emphasize his love of music, his refusal to give up even when defeat was certain. And perhaps that's why the myth endures. It's not just about Apollo's pride or Marsyas's punishment. It's about the tension between mortals and gods, about the line between admiration and hubris. It's about the risks of reaching too high, of believing your gifts make you untouchable. You can almost hear the mournful sound of the river named for Marsyas as you walk through the ancient landscape, the water whispering secrets as it winds through the trees. The people who live nearby still leave offerings at its banks. Flowers, bits of bread, a few drops of wine. Not because they fear Apollo's wrath, but because they remember Marsyas and what his music meant. In the distance, a breeze stirs, setting the faintest trace of a melody. It's easy to imagine it's the sound of a flute still playing in the shadows of the forest. Whether it's real or just the rustle of leaves doesn't matter. The myth has taken root, and it will never truly fade. Section 10. Time passes, but the story of Marsyas lingers like a bittersweet song carried on the wind. Children in distant villages still whisper his name when they practice their instruments, afraid yet fascinated by the satyr who dared to challenge a god. Travelers still pause by the river said to have sprung from his blood, listening to its soft murmur as though it might reveal secrets about pride and pain. In the stillness of the forest, where his music once danced through the trees, you can almost imagine the echoes of his flute weaving through the leaves like a ghostly refrain. Apollo, meanwhile, continues his life untouched. He plays his lyre in gleaming temples, his music flawless, his pride unbent. The other gods neither question nor comfort him. They know better than to ask whether he ever wonders if the contest was truly fair, whether he ever regrets how it ended. The truth is, the gods are eternal. Regret is for mortals, and Apollo is no mortal. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greek myths were often told to reinforce the idea of divine order. Mortals were meant to respect the hierarchy, to understand their place in the universe. Marsyas's fate was a reminder that even the smallest perceived insult to a god's pride could have catastrophic consequences. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some later poets reimagined Marsyas's story, suggesting that Apollo was moved by remorse and buried the satyr with honors. In these versions, he planted a tree over Marsyas's grave, its bark etched with lines that resembled the satyr's flute. Scholars still argue whether these softer endings were invented simply to make the myth more palatable for audiences tired of tragedy, or if they reflected a growing discomfort with the gods' severity. The myth's legacy spread beyond Greece, carried by storytellers to other lands. It became a lesson cloaked in music and melody. Beware of arrogance, but also beware the fragility of those in power. Mortals would gather around fires at night, retelling the tale in low voices as they tuned their own instruments. The younger ones would ask, "Could Marsyas have won?" And the elders would shake their heads, saying the same thing. No one can beat a god at their own game. As you walk through the imagined landscape of this myth, you pass the river that sings softly, its currents weaving around your ankles like threads of memory. The trees sway gently overhead, their leaves brushing each other in a whisper that sounds almost like a flute. You realize that the world is quieter now, subdued by the weight of the lesson Marsyas left behind. And yet, a part of you wonders if Marsyas' spirit, wherever it may be, still plays. Maybe, in some hidden glade where even gods dare not tread, Marsyas' music still rises, wild and free, unbound by fear or pride. Maybe that's why the river sings. You take a slow breath as you step away from the story, the forest fading behind you like a dream dissolving at dawn. The sound of the river is distant now, just a faint hum, steady and calming. The leaves that once seemed to whisper secrets now rustle softly, blending with the quiet rhythm of your own heartbeat. Everything feels slower, softer, as though the world itself is encouraging you to rest. You think about Marsyas and Apollo, about music that can lift the soul, and stories that can teach even in their sadness. There's no need to dwell on the harsher details now. Let them slip away like water slipping between stones. What remains is the melody, the gentle reminder that beauty and pride, joy and caution are threads woven through every life. The air around you feels warmer, thicker with comfort. You imagine the stars overhead, distant and steady, watching quietly as you close your eyes.
Yes. Each breath you take seems deeper, each exhale leaving behind a little more of the day's weight. You feel the tension in your shoulders loosen, your hands relax, your thoughts slow into soft, harmless shapes. There's no need to think about gods or contests or what-ifs anymore. Those belong to the ancient world now, tucked safely into the myths where they belong. What's here, in this quiet moment, is simple. Your body sinking deeper into comfort, your mind drifting like a leaf on a gentle stream. Let the faint song of the river carry you further from the noise of the day. Let the stars fade into a soft blur. Let your breathing find that easy, natural rhythm. You are safe, you are still, and it's time to rest.